Hello there. Brexit is another large step closer as the Withdrawal Agreement bill clears the House of Commons, gets tied into a bundle with red tape, yes it really does, and is taken hot foot to the upper house of Remain, or should I say, the House of Lords. Firstly, as ever, please kickstart that YouTube algorithm into action by giving this video a big, fat like. Yesterday, by 330 votes to 231, our Members of Parliament voted the Withdrawal Agreement Bill through the House of Commons, and it now wends its way to the upper house for our Lords to peruse it next week. In the past, a Brexit-based bill going to the House of Lords would have meant it being effectively rewritten into a Remain in the EU bill. But this time, facing a government with an 80-strong majority and one intent on delivering Brexit, there is thankfully little they can do. There are no more Oliver Letwins, no more Ken Clarks, no more Anna Soubrys, and no more Joe Swinsons that the Lords can rely on in the lower house to help them squash Brexit. And if they do try to make a pro-EU statement, they will just look foolish and attract even more attention from those wishing to reform them out of existence. Now, part of me hopes that our peers do try it on, and maybe delay the bill long enough to make it impossible to ratify the Withdrawal Agreement Treaty with the EU. And that would lead to a clean break, no-deal Brexit on the 31st of January, because Boris Johnson could not allow another Article 50 extension on his watch, could he? But the chances of that happening are slim to zero. One supposes, therefore, that apart from a couple of tweaks to properly improve it, if any are needed, that the Lords will return the bill to the House of Commons unscathed. Then it's up to the EU Parliament and Council to give it the final OK prior to Brussels and London signing the temporary Withdrawal Agreement Treaty into force on the 31st of January. I've no doubt that will all now happen in good time, and then it's down to the UK government and the EU Commission negotiators to work out a deal over the next 10 to 11 months. Now, for those who've caught the latest news that the House of Lords has savaged the EU Withdrawal Agreement itself, saying it gives too much power to the EU, don't despair. Don't give the Remainers any hope, because I think that issue has already been addressed within the EU Withdrawal Agreement Bill, which the Lords has yet to officially scrutinise. It looks to me like Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson have been looking ahead. The Express reports on this issue saying, in the report from the House of Lords European Union Committee, they stated fears that the UK-EU Joint Committee lacks transparency or any potential democratic oversight. The UK-EU Joint Committee has the ability to amend the withdrawal agreement unilaterally, while decisions emanating from the group will be legally binding for the UK and the EU. All sounds so scary, doesn't it? Brussels back in charge and all that. But Boris and his team have already been looking ahead at that one, as the Withdrawal Agreement Bill that's just gone to the House of Lords contains two clauses that I think neuter that concern. The first, at section 34, makes it clear that only a minister, not a civil servant, only a minister can co-chair the Joint Committee. And secondly, at section 35, it says that the UK co-chair cannot consent to the Joint Committee using what is called the written procedure. And it is only that specific written procedure, consented to by both the EU and UK co-chairs, that can put anything binding in place. So once the Withdrawal Agreement Bill becomes law, that Joint Committee will be a toothless paper tiger. As far as I can see, it will just be a powerless talking shop. Unless the UK Parliament later changes that law, of course. So it's finally happening. The UK will leave the EU treaties at 11 p.m. on the 31st of January 2020. That's just 3 weeks to the day away. And there is now more chance of Jean-Claude Juncker attending an AA meeting or Guy Verhofstadt telling Nigel Farage that he was right all along than there is a chance of Brexit being stopped. And I say let Big Ben peal out its tune to mark the occasion. And failing that, I gather that Brexiteer Tory MP Andrew Bidgen has volunteered to grab a rather large hammer and climb the steps of Elizabeth Tower to bong the big bell himself. But I now have to point out that every single one of the 6 Labour Party leadership contenders voted against this Brexit bill. Presumably they think that no one's watching anymore. But they are. We are. And I assume they're using the excuse that they can't vote for the bill because it isn't full of human rights and workers' rights clauses, etc., that tie us firmly into the EU on the spurious grounds that the UK can't possibly do these things for itself anymore. And if they think that, they should stand down from their party leadership contest today. I mean, do we really have to enshrine the Erasmus student exchange programme into the Withdrawal Agreement bill? Really? No, that was just a very shallow attempt by the Remainers to make a point. A completely meaningless point. Well, the message to Remainers is, the UK can look after the rights of its own people, and it does not need an outside authority to give us its permission first. We can also make separate side agreements with the EU regarding such things as the Erasmus programme during the forthcoming negotiations. That's exactly what those negotiations are for. And I also have to inform you that the UK will now enjoy greater democratic accountability, with our votes no longer being diluted across the whole of the EU for the benefit of unaccountable Eurocrats. And no longer will our 2 main political parties have their manifestos hamstrung by what is coming down the EU legislative pipeline. Oh yes, while Labour and Conservative parties were both firmly pro-EU, they could never promise to do anything that was in contravention of what Brussels had already quietly decided was going to happen. Those party promises had to dovetail in neatly with proposed EU law, because that would ensure that there would be little argument to highlight that it was actually originating in the EU when the law fronted up at Westminster to be given the grand rubber stamp in Parliament. And all helped by appointing pro-EU civil servant mandarins and lords. But now, as long as Boris is true to his word, then that phase of our political history is thankfully finished. But I do have to warn the good Brexiteers, even now, before the Withdrawal Agreement treaty has even been signed, the Remainers are converting to rejoiners and are already formulating their plans. They have not given up. Not that I ever expected them to do that anyway. For example, writing in the New European, the co-founder of Scientists for EU and Healthier In, Mike Galsworthy, talks about where the Remain campaign got it wrong as well as got it right, with the aim of learning the lessons to get ahead. And he outlines his vision of a plan to get the people behind re-entering the EU, and ends by saying, "Finally, of course we want to battle to rejoin the EU as full members. But that battle can only be won after we've built the deep societal and digital structures that have the force to drive such an effort. Let us ensure that in the future we look back and thank ourselves for the work we invested in this moment now to build such a national community. This is the future of politics. History is long. Let's learn our lessons and get ahead of the game." And that bloke in the EU cloak, wearing an EU hat and bellowing through an outsized megaphone, says he is also going to keep making his unwelcome presence felt outside various places in the Westminster area, predominantly on Wednesdays, I gather, when PMQs takes place. Now it is tempting to just ignore the rejoiners, or even have a giggle at their expense. but they are deadly serious. And that is exactly how UKIP was born and eventually won. So we must maintain our vigilance and not allow a foothold to develop for those that would sell off our independence once again. So the task for a highly independence-focused UK party is not over, and probably never will be. And now for some cheering news. The first is that I hear that all the talk about post-Brexit chlorinated chicken has been proved wrong. Now, I initially thought that was reference to the current leader of the opposition being turfed out of his position in the next couple of months. But I see from the BBC that it actually refers to the current ban on chlorine-washed chicken from the US remaining in place after Brexit. In fact, both chlorine-washed chicken and hormone-treated beef will be kept out of the UK under any trade deal with the US, according to the Environment Secretary Theresa Villiers. And the other good piece of news is that according to the Ministry of Defence, UK troops will not be joining an EU army. Taken them long enough to say that though, hasn't it? The UK Defence Journal quotes a government spokesperson as saying, "Claims that the UK could be forced into any form of EU army are inaccurate. The UK has always made our own sovereign decisions on defence spending, on where and how to deploy our armed forces. This will remain the case as we leave the EU." But things can change, so keep your eyes on those post-Brexit Day trade talks. And the EU has put the boot in early in those trade negotiations by saying that any attempt by the UK to stop EU vessels catching fish in our waters could lead to Cod War-style hostilities. With Andrej Plenković, the Prime Minister of Croatia, which currently holds the 6-monthly rotating EU presidency, saying it was important for several of the EU 27 states to be allowed to continue fishing in UK waters. He also said, "We want to avoid any fishery skirmishes in the Atlantic. We have seen them before, we don't want to see them again." Simple answer, pay your fishing communities to decommission their boats and retrain, along the lines of what the UK had to do when we wrongly handed the control of our exclusive economic zone over to Brussels in the first place. And while some may think that a trade deal with the EU will be impossible to complete by the end of the year, economist Robert Lee, writing in Briefings for Brexit, says that a deal is not only possible but very likely. And that, he says, is all down to our strong negotiating position and a weak EU economy. And he concludes by saying, "The conditions are there for the EU and the UK to reach a successful trade accord in 2020. If the political will is there, the relatively short time frame available is not a limiting factor." So it's all to play for as far as the UK is concerned. But as we approach an unstoppable Brexit day, I have to ask, is this a time for Brexiteer triumphalism and celebration, or a time for quiet and healing? And to answer that, I would ask you to consider what the Remainer reaction would have been to a Remain victory as a result of the 2016 EU referendum. Do you think there would have been a measured and healing approach with talk about listening to the concerns of Brexiteers, or just lots of celebratory sneering and insults coming from the Remainers? I know which of those two my money's on, so I say bring on the triumphalism, bring on the celebrations, the 50p coins and the chimes of Big Ben. Leave the Remainers to look across the channel through their blue and gold star-tinted spectacles, thinking that all those yellow-clad figures in Paris must be colourful unicorns dancing with friendly gendarmes. Leave them thinking that the likes of Sweden don't have any problems, that the Eurozone isn't struggling. Leave them thinking that the EU is full of sweetness, light and candy floss, while also unwittingly holding the contrary view by claiming that the UK is bad for not accepting all those people trying to flee from the EU in their rubber boats. Let them keep on blindly thinking that the EU gave us lots of money and didn't just return what we'd already given them in the first place after skimming half off the top for their own use. Let them cry in their beer as we celebrate removing all the EU flags and insignia and once again proudly flying the flags of the UK and its nations. Brexit Day is an important day, a day that marks a new dawn for the UK. So get out there and have some fun. And if you want to see some more of me, buy one of my mugs. And if you want to hear more from me, please don't forget to subscribe and also press that little bell or you won't get any notifications. Anyway, what will you be doing on Brexit Day? Celebrating or sat shriveled in a darkened room? Please share and thank you for watching.